glad to see this crowd. And I just want to say that for those who have not met Faith at any time, or those who may have just met her, I just want to introduce her as Faith Tyldsley. She has deep, deep roots in this community. I think she probably knows a good several or more of you. And she was born and raised.
Yeah, I'm in my Providence. I'll tell you where I come from.
That's right. She's got the whole thing. So, I just want to say, as I was looking through some of her material and some that we have about the round table, it amazed me that of all the owners from 1892 on, the Tyldsleys published and edited and owned the Millbrook Round Table for 54 years, 55 years, had that last year on. When you look through all the other ownerships and publishers, it was about 10 years, it seems, an average of 10 years maybe, that they've all owned it. So 54 years, their family published and edited.
And we miss it!
Yeah, oh my gosh! Miss it.
Oh,
and so this kind of talk is long overdue, and you know, as soon as her book came out, Edna, about her mom, and she has the appendices in there and some chapters, thank you, on the Millbrook Round Table, and so, you know, it's prime time now to learn a little more about the Millbrook Round Table and where we go from here. And I'll also say, being at the bookstore through many of those years, 80s, 90s, I even saw the paper go from, you know, being printed, which she's going to talk about, which is really exciting to learn, I think, to it being digital. And I remember at the very end, with the Journal Register owning it out of New Jersey, they would run over at the end of the day, maybe on a Tuesday, and with their disc. And we, as the bookstore, would FedEx it up to Albany, and it would get printed up there. So that was the change even in my bit of time, that this paper has changed. So I just love the history. So, hey.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm shocked at the number of people. I thought if there were 5 or 6 people, this would be wonderful, which it is. Now, I'm allowed 20 minutes. I'm setting my timer. I mean, I don't want to go over because I think it can be...
She grew up in a deadline system. She did. She's precise and meticulous.
Lots of deadlines. So I'm going to set it, and we'll see what happens. And then you can decide if you want me to sit down or continue on with the sentence that I might be in the middle of at the point. But okay, so yes, I feel like this chair ought to be given to someone who's standing over there. I am not going to use it, and you're all standing, and there's 2 chairs there that nobody's sitting in. Okay, I set this up really nicely. I came an hour ago to set up our little area and put little. Well, all right, so I was born on what you call a newspaper day. I don't know if anybody knows what that means. What does that mean to anybody? The day that the paper was supposed to come out, right next door down here. I was born on a Thursday. It set the whole paper off. They had to do it a day late because my parents had to go. Now, what was the hospital? Is it St. Francis or Vassar that I would have been at in Poughkeepsie?
Either at that time.
I think it was St. Francis. Well, anyway, that's where my mother rushed off. It was the middle of a snowstorm. The paper was supposed to be going out. It disrupted everything, and that's something I was told, you know, that I'd done that. So it was all right. And then I was baptized and confirmed at Grace Church up the road here. I sang in the children's choir for a number of years. I went to kindergarten where you all are now in the village hall. That's where I attended kindergarten. I went to kindergarten with some very famous Millbrook people, and I'm going to list their names off, and hopefully some people recognize them. One was a mayor, Gary Safari. The people in my class, Gary Safari, Gloria Tamino, who's now Gloria Tamino Malella. They own the nice mill, the old mill. Kathy Manzidoro, with Kathy Manzi, a good friend of mine. Pat Wayne. We used to go in 4th grade. The 4th grades would always go to the farm that's now the winery. to see the cows in the barn. John Gifford, who I called Johnny Gifford. John Gifford was in my class. So those people I've all sort of kept in touch with, been interested in over the years, even though I moved out and they moved onward too. I went to elementary school at what is now the Washington, what's it called, Washington Town Hall?
Yes.
Yeah, Washington Town Building, that was my elementary school. I attended Thorne, and I was in the Girl Scouts. My mother thought it was very important, and it's good she did. The problem with the Girl Scouts was that because my father was the editor of the paper, whenever it came time to vote each year on who was going to be the scribe, in Girl Scouts it was called the scribe, not the secretary. You had to take notes during the meeting. What you did was basically you had refreshments and did a project, and then you had to write it up and give it to the newspaper. So since my father was the editor, I had to always be the scribe every year for some reason. And then rode in the pony club for quite a while with Mrs. Coleman. That probably nobody knew. Probably that goes back too far. But then Barbara Meyer, of course, took over the pony club in a big way. And I was kind of on the cusp of that. Okay, so that's me, just so that you know I'm a real Millbrook person, you know. All right, now, just a little bit of the history part. In 1906, William Tyldsley, who is my grandfather, he was a native of Lancashire, England, Lancashire, and he purchased the Millbrook, what was called then the Millbrook Mirror and Round Table. And he had emigrated at the early age, to me, of 24 from England. He was one of 13 children. And he emigrated, he left Liverpool and came to Boston in 1900 at the age of 24. He was on the maiden, kind of interesting to me, the maiden voyage of the Saxonia. And the Saxonia was a Cunard, part of the Cunard line, considered kind of a posh ship at that point if you were in steerage. Which he wasn't, so that was good. All right, so then, many of you know that, I'm going to skip over a number of years, but my father, who was the editor and publisher, took over from his father. My father took over in 1948 and became the sole owner, editor, and publisher of the Millbrook Round Table, and then we had the commercial printing. We called it the Millbrook Press, which was commercial printing, which really paid for things. The paper does not pay you. You hope that your advertisers pay for the paper, but the commercial printing is where they would make the money. And so, he started in 48. In 1960, he unexpectedly died of a heart attack. I was 12, my mother was 47, and she had no idea of business. She had been a stay-at-home, she stopped teaching. She had been a teacher, stopped teaching when she got married because the rules back then were if you got married, you couldn't teach anymore as a woman. The jobs had to go to the men. So that changed over time. But by the time Daddy died, she then went back to teaching. But she had this Millbrook Round Table to take care of. And she was not a businesswoman, didn't know what to do with it, really was not. She worked with my father on that. She's a proofreader, but she didn't know what to do with the business. So very soon after, in 1961, she sold it to what's called the Times Publishing Company of New Milford, to a John Nash, and some of you may remember or not. But now, Robert, you can't answer this question, and neither can you, because you have prior knowledge. But I'm wondering if anybody here might make a guess at how much my mother sold the business for in 1961. I have the bill of sale here. How much do you think?
50,000.
4,000?
14,000.
14,000? It's like an auction. We got to go up a little bit. You're low. Yeah, I'm thinking.
I was thinking 50.
Well, that's close. It was 62,000. That was the. I don't know. I have a lot of things that were saved, and I have that, which is interesting.
And that is the press and the building and the business, the
The
subscribers.
building, the real estate, all the
Yeah,
presses.
that's the difference.
So at the end, I am going to go quickly through this, which is basically my scrapbook of the Millbrook Press, but we'll do it quickly. But that bill of sale is in there. I wanted to talk a little bit about my memories of the press, because when I was little, of course, my father was running paper, my mother was helping him. I don't know if, all of you probably realize that this building down here, which is the Millbrook Antiques Mall, was the Millbrook Press building. So I still consider that when I walk in there, it's kind of home in a way. When I go through this, I have some pictures in the 40s of the way that building looked. And also the house next to it, which was a restaurant, and you could all help me. I don't know what the last restaurant was. There have been several restaurants. Aurelia's, or Townhouse, whatever. That was where we lived. That was our house. I had a bedroom up on the second floor. I have pictures of us in the living room of that, of there. And I think the four brothers have it now, but they really are not quite ready to move it. They're working on it, right. So anyway, that's where we lived when we first moved in, and then my parents built a house up on Chestnut Ridge, 5 miles out of town. So my memories of the press are, at that early age, is that the front, well, you all know how that, if you walk into that building, does anybody ever walk in there? Yeah, sure. Okay, so if you walk in, there's, first of all, there's sort of that room that you walk into where there's a desk and all. That was where we had office supplies. My father sold like staplers and paper clips and paper and, you know, all the sorts of things you might, it was like a mini Staples, you know, at that time. And also sold a good selection of Hallmark cards, which were particularly nice cards at that, well, they still are. But I mean, back then they were like the nice cards to send. And so people, a lot of people would come in simply to buy things in that shop. And I don't know how this was, I guess it was allowed because it was that long ago, but at age 10 and 11, I was allowed to work there. And the cash register, I don't know, it was really big cash register. You have to press the things down and the little things pop up. I mean, I thought it was really smart that I could take people's money, you know, it was $1 a card or something very inexpensive, and press the little buttons, and then they gave me the money and I gave them the change. And then that sort of went into this story right here. This is called a fudge pie. It's an extremely good item to eat. I've cut it into 16 pieces. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I did want everybody to try it if they wanted. Molly Meyer, does anybody know Molly, my old childhood friend? Molly
His brother,
is
our sister.
Alan's
sister.
Alan is her
sister-in-law.
brother. It's your sister-in-law. Molly is now in New Haven, and I were good friends, and we lived very close together on Hammond Hill Road up on Chestnut Ridge. And so I don't know why we got this idea or how at this young age, but at 10 and 11, we would bake, she would make one at her house, I would make one at mine. We would bring them down to the press, and we called it the press, the building. And in that room that you enter into, there was the counter where you count the money out and pay people. And we'd put the fudge pie, and we'd have a sign, 25 cents a piece. I mean, this would not go today, but back then it was great, and people would come in, they'd take a piece of pie and give us a quarter. And we thought that was great. We felt pretty rich about that, because who was paying for the ingredients? So, of course, our parents were. But we thought we were making all the money, and I don't think we ever gave anything to our others. But anyway, Molly and I told Molly, I had lunch with her Friday, and I told her I'm making a fudge pie, I'm taking it to the presentation, I'm going to hope that everybody gets a taste of it, because it will take you back to the days, I hate to say, 50 years ago, whatever it was, because we had many fudge pies next door. So that's that, and anybody who would like a piece is welcome to have it now. And Allison, if you want, unwrap it. And I forgot napkins, so it's like the old-fashioned, I kind of took these from the bathroom. Paper towels. It's not too sticky, but it's kind of like a brownie. If anybody would, I'd love anybody to have a tiny little piece or whatever. All right, so that's kind of just a side. Does anybody remember a place called the Coffee Spot?
Yes.
Sure.
Sure. I loved the Coffee Spot. The Coffee Spot had the best roast beef sandwiches. They had rare roast beef sandwiches. I only know because when I was younger, like 10, 11, 12, and my parents would be working on the paper, and I didn't have to go to school that day. So I would spend the day at the press, which was always interesting to me. I didn't mind it. But we had this special treat to me of going to the Coffee Spot for lunch. And I only order the roast beef sandwich with a dill pickle every time. And I remember that. I wish we had a coffee spot now. That was a big place to go. Now, when I go into the press building, I still call it the press building, the antiques mall now. There's that room, as I said, the sort of the office where we sold office supplies. And then if you go into a small, there's a hallway that then goes in, and there's a room off to the left, and there's a room off to the right. And the one on the left was my father's office. So when you go in, I don't know if you picture this because you probably don't go in there that often, but it's the first little sort of cubby hole on the left. And it looks tiny now. You go in because, of course, they put things on the wall and they have shelves and all. But that was where my father had his desk and sat in there and wrote the editorials and did whatever he did. And then the opposite side was the two secretaries. And I look at it now and I thought, how did they all fit in here? But I think things were just smaller back then. We didn't expect to be so spread out, and it was fine. And also, they've got a lot of stuff in there now. So if you took all that out, it probably would have. But every time I go in there, I always go in. It's in my father's office, and I say, "Hi, Daddy." And it's sort of like he's there. He's got to be there in a way because he was there for so many hours working on the paper over so many years, and his father before him. So that's something I do every time I come to Millbrook. I go in there. I haven't bought anything there for a while, but I do go visit and soak up the atmosphere. Okay, so then what I want to do is, this is going to be a bit hard because you're far away, but what I'm going to do after I go through it, I will pass it around, or if anybody wants to look at it closely. But this is something I put together so that I could have a memory of the press and all. This, I can't take these out and pass them around, it'll be too much for them. But these sepia photographs, which are in the beginning, this is a picture of the house we lived in, which is the old restaurant, and the press is next to it, and so on. And these were taken in 1940. Is it like that?
No, me, sorry.
Oh, okay. It's not like 20 minutes already. Okay. My father took this great picture of the Millbrook Press. It's in the book. In 1950. It's the Millbrook Press in snow, and it's just a really nice picture. Okay, now, where's Henry? Oh, there you are. Henry, I talked to you at the farmer's market about the picture of, the picture of the Corner News, what was the Corner News. And what I hadn't realized was my father had bought do you know what I'm saying, Corner News? What restaurant's that now?
Barbaro.
Okay, so that was, of course, Johnny Tating's store for so many years, a wonderful store. And my father had bought it. He was he liked to do real estate stuff. So he bought it, but he's the one that sold it to John Tating. And this is a 1945, if you care to look at it, it's in here. It shows it actually before. When did John buy that? Do you remember when he bought it?
47.
Yes, so this was just before he bought it from my father, which is kind of neat to see how it looked. Of course, I have many old newspapers. This is one that is saying that my grandfather, when he died, is an obituary. My grandfather, who started the paper, here's my father. I know you can't see this, but when I pass it around, you'll be able to sort of look. This is my father at the folder. Back then, you didn't have all the automatic sorts of things. He had to stand and feed the large newsprint into this machine that then would chop in the middle, and then it chopped again, and you ended up with the paper, with the folded paper. But here he is feeding the paper in. And then the rest of it, an interview of my mother with someone about the paper. Okay, another one. This is the copy of the selling of the Millbrook Press. Anybody who's interested in reading sort of old business sorts of things would be interesting. It talks about what's included in the price and all, and then at the bottom, $62,000 is what it is. All right, now, I think this is interesting. I have a copy of the Round Table. You all know, or some of you recognize, of course, Farnham Collins' name. I was hoping he'd be here today because he helped me a bit with the book with some dates on the the fox hunting things. But this is Millbrook Roundtable from July 27th, 61. This is his wedding, his bride. So here is farm. So that's that. Yes. And then what's interesting is that I also have, since my mother was running the paper at that point, I have a mock-up of the old-fashioned way, how they decided to put a paper together. I mean, that was what they did. They took a picture, they pasted it on the thing, they wrote in pencil what it would say. I mean, this is the old-fashioned way.
Set the type.
But fun to see how, so that's, I just happened to have that one and I had the copy of the paper. So to compare that, so if anybody wants to look at that, I don't mind you taking it out. I am going to stick it back in here. But when you get hold of this, if you want, I don't have it in the right place. Pull it out and read it. I mean, it's kind of fun to read these old bridal. They went into a little more detail about what the bride wore and all that sort of thing. And the mock-up, feel free to pull it out and look at it. These are letters of condolence that come along to my mother at the point that she has to sell the round table. There were many people that were very upset that it went out of our family at that point. And, you know, it was a very family-oriented, community-oriented paper. My father was trying to have everything be, you know, to uplift the community, to make sure that people got recognized and things like that. So there were a number of letters that my mother, thank you, received. That looks like that's been chomped on. And then these are letters of appreciation. I don't know that this would look familiar to anybody, but this got put out in 1992. You've got many copies of this, right? But this was a great supplement celebrating the 100th, what would have been the 100th birthday of the Millbrook Round Table. And there's a lot of good articles in here talking about what it was like, including an interview that was done with my mother. And you're welcome to pull that out and look at that too, even if you pass the thing around and keep this and look at it. We'll get it back in again. And that is pretty much what I have for this. So what I'm going to do is just take this, and it's kind of, it might fall apart, you know, something might fall out. Oh, that's an extra copy of, so if anybody wants to, there's an extra copy of that. What did you say her name is? Anne. Anne. It just says Miss Elizabeth Ann Archbold. Archbold was her maiden name apparently, huh? Yeah, I don't know her. I know to talk to her on the phone. Oh my gosh, that's 20 minutes. All done. Oh. All done. But I didn't finish it first. Can I do a little more?
Keep going.
All right, so I'm going to pass this to you. I don't know if you can hold it. Or if you even want to, you could rest it on somewhere. Things will kind of fall out like that. Just stick them back in. All right, so I shared that. I wanted to share the memories and the scrapbook. And I want to do a little bit of a reading. The reading is my mother's memories of the Millbrook Press, because she spent a lot of hours there. She never had an official position, but she and my father joked that at the time he met her, he needed a proofreader. And so he found out she was a teacher and really had more education than he did. She'd gone further. And so he decided to marry her to get the proofreader into the family. So that was always kind of a fun story. So I want to read just this part to you from the chapter in here that is the Millbrook Round Table chapter. And it's just called the Millbrook Round Table, and it has that nice picture that you're going to see in there of the round table in the snow, the Millbrook Press in the snow, which was taken in 1950. So this is what she writes. Now, if you have the book or you don't, there's blue writing, there's blueprint. And the reason I did that was that the blueprint is what she has said or written. And it kind of makes it easier. To me, it's a lot more readable. Because if you just read all this black text, and you have to put it in quotes, and then you have to say, she said, he said, so I came up with this. I thought it was a pretty novel idea. Nobody said they'd done it before. So I told my publisher, I said, I would like certain portions of this book in blue. No quotes, just blueprint. So anything that's blue in this whole book are her words. It might have been from a journal. It might have been from a letter, from whatever. So this is what she wrote about the Round Table. My involvement with the Millbrook Round Table began in 1937. Does anybody have trouble hearing and want to read this as I go? I've got one copy. Does anybody like that? Does anybody want this? I have a copy of it. No? You don't like to read? Some people do.
We can hear you very well, Dave. We can hear you very well.
You can? Thank you, Jonathan.
It's your singing voice.
My involvement with the Millbrook Round Table began in 1937, the year that John Ogden Tyldsley and I were married. That was 57 years ago. Well, of course, she wrote this a while ago. But John's father, William Tyldsley, a native of Lancashire, England, had purchased the Millbrook Printing Company, which published the Millbrook Mirror and Round Table in November of 1906. In 1932, John joined his father as partner, and in 1948, he became the sole owner, editor, and publisher. I do not know when the mirror part of the name was eliminated, but I have heard that the elimination was welcome because the words mirror and round table made one think of a furniture store. Neither do I know just when Millbrook Printing Company was changed to Millbrook Press. The newspaper often fed on printing jobs, which might supply news items and or advertising. I do not know that it was the printing, I do know that it was the printing jobs that fed us. We could not have survived on income from the newspaper alone. John was passionately interested in his community's welfare. He often ran an extra section without the advertising to pay for it because he felt the articles making up the section were necessary and important. It was a purely local paper. World and country news were available from many other sources, but only the local paper could report on activities of organizations, schools, churches, local sports, and personal items, which people loved. To go back to 1937, somehow, this is about the proofreading, I think, somehow the job of proofreading fell to me soon after I became a Tyldsley. At that time, we lived in the house next to the Millbrook Press. The business was not as busy then, and we managed with one office telephone that had an extension in the house. A buzzer operated from the office, informing me if a call was for me. When I had finished a batch of proofs, I would buzz for John or the secretary to come and pick them up. These were lean days on the heels of the Depression, and there was rarely any money to spare. It seemed that we were always needing new machinery, and it was expensive. We had only one linotype machine at first, operated by Bill Russell, who was not only careful and fast, but also an excellent speller, so that he corrected spelling when necessary from the copy he was sending. Sometimes we had to type copy that was difficult to read, written by local people about local items. If it was legible, the copy went directly to Bill. In the shop, there were from 2 to 4 printers whose work alternated between commercial printing jobs and preparing the weekly newspaper, which was published on Fridays. It was Thursdays till I messed it up with me. No. Okay, those working on the newspaper made up the pages by setting movable type into frames, referred to as forms. All forms were then arranged into the bed, quote unquote, of the printing press. Ink was applied across the forms, and newsprint was run over them by large rollers applying the pressure needed to leave an imprint. The press was hand-fed, meaning that one person had to send each individual sheet of newsprint into the press one at a time. a lengthy and noisy process. I had nothing to do with the mechanical part of the production, but I did help with the folding once the pages were printed. For a few years, we folded by hand, 3 or 4 of us with our own piles. Many a Thursday night, we did not finish folding the 700 to 800 copies of the paper until 10 p.m. or midnight. I recall a few nights when John and I finished much later. It was a great day when we were able to purchase a folder, a machine which folded the large printed paper sheets into consecutive pages of the newspaper. In time, all the machinery was brought up to date. And those of you who have the, are you passing, where is it, back there? Yeah, that's that picture of Daddy at the folder there, feeding newsprint into the folder in the 50s, that was 1950s. Okay, to continue on just a bit more of my mother's words. In the early 1940s, we lost 2 of our printers to the Army. Some of you remember Phil Shara, does that name sound?
Yeah.
He was wonderful, yes.
We have a photo of him here also with a 4th grade tour in the 2000s.
Okay. Phil Shara and Dominic Fort. It seemed as if John worked 20 of the 24 hours those days. I don't recall much about my part in the paper, as I was very busy with my young children at that point. It was a glorious day when the war ended. Phil and Dominic returned to us. We were like a family. John always had very good secretaries. Everyone pulled together and we felt a true loyalty. On Thursday afternoons, all work was suspended for a short time for tea, which I would bring up, my mother speaking here, which I would bring over from the house along with some goodies to lunch on. Pecan sandies, does anybody remember pecan? I don't think they still make them. Pecan sandies and Lorna Doones were the favored store-bought cookies. This custom continued for as long as we had the paper. Columnists were very popular. They included Bishop Broderick, another story he wrote, Aiken Skidmore, who wrote You Said It, Bill Kane, who covered sports, and Louise Tompkins, a lot of people know her name, Millbrook 50 years ago. 52 years ago this week, John began taking old Round Table files to Louise Tompkins, from which she chose items for her column, Millbrook 50 years ago. Stricken with debilitating arthritis at the age of 19 while studying to be a physical education teacher in Boston, Louise spent much of her life bedridden. Her fingers were curled into tortuous shapes, making the use of her hands impossible. She wrote in longhand using a pen that an assistant had to insert into her grip. She did copious research on topics of local interest and also wrote about her childhood on her family's farm. Secretaries over the year included Winifred Bowman, Doris Safari, Jenny Sotero, Helen LaRue, Berta Kelly, Jane Ames, and Betty Lang. After we moved to Chestnut Ridge, I worked about 2.5 days a week, proofreading, writing, editing, news gathering, and hostessing the Thursday afternoon teas. John never gave up trying to help the community grow and prosper. He was an active member of the Rotary Club and founder of the Lions Club. The newspaper championed the causes of good zoning and school centralization. I always had the best of 2 worlds, working with my husband for the good of the community and being a mother and homemaker. Okay, well, thank you. And if there are any questions, that would be fine. Is there anything,
Questions and comments?
yeah,
Sure.
whatever that you would like to bring up, and if not, have some more fudge pie. My books are for sale, not that I'm, toting them, not being, but I'm the only one that sells my books. I don't have a plan to be, I'm not on, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that. I couldn't afford to do that. And then these just here, I just want to mention, I had these maps made by a cartographer. I hired a cartographer. She's in California. I sent her the way Millbrook looked, and this map is in the book. And she did a map. And then it went into the book. And then I liked the map so much that I went and had it copied. I don't know why. I thought some other people might like it. And then I had it made up in 3 sizes, like a placemat and things like that. What are you going to use yours for? I'm curious. What would you?
I would just put it on my table.
It's kind of small. Don't
I
you
just
leave
want to look
big?
at it.
It's a great map.
So anyway, I did, and I'm selling, I had them printed, I had the paper printed, then I had it laminated, and I don't really know what it all cost me. I'm going to charge 5 and 6 and 8 for the base, which probably doesn't cover it. Yes.
Well, Denise had a great idea
Oh, what was it? Yeah.
for these. And that's anybody that's in real estate, they should give it to their
Yes,
customers.
yes.
That's a
You
good
know,
idea.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be great?
Or
So
you
you
can find a real estate person to buy
Yes.
100
probably you should get in touch with the real estate offices and see if they want to take some of these.
Even the book
That's
would
good.
be, as a gift to a new buyer, maybe.
What's
Like,
a new
The
buyer?
book as a new buyer,
Oh, the book.
to give a
Yeah,
sense of
Millbrook,
what was here.
I would say my mother, the book is about Millbrook, about my mother, but Millbrook is certainly a character in this book. The
In fact, can I tell a little story
Go
about
ahead.
restaurants? Because
Yeah, anything.
Faith wanted to include, she wanted to include the restaurants actually that were here when her mother was still living. And, well, I don't know, so looking over a group at one point, I guess I said, boy, there are a lot more restaurants than that. But then she had to narrow it down, and then she said, oh, my goodness, well, I haven't been to that one or that one or that one. Yeah, it's usually Les Beaux or the diner, I guess. So she said, okay, if I come over next week, then breakfast we can have here, and lunch there, and dinner at another one. She's gonna cover them all, so she had at least been to each one that she was putting in the book. But I think the list came out very nicely, because it's a list of those that were here.
I have
with
another
your mom.
question.
Yes.
You mentioned that there were people that wrote certain.
Yes, the columnists.
Cut the columns, but were there also reporters?
The columnists, I think there was an overlap, because you see, if something happened, that columnist might pick up that item because it was about Millbrook. The reporters, Jane Ames was a reporter. That name I read as part of the staff, although it was under secretary, but Jane would write, because I remember she wrote some articles too, but I don't remember reporters being a separate thing so much. I think the columnists kind of did, because there were 5 of them, so, And then there were personal, if people remember, there was a personal thing where it actually said, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so are going on a trip to France next week. Well, that wouldn't be done these days, because you don't want someone to know you're going away.
Right.
But, or Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so have just returned from 3 weeks in Switzerland. Well, nowadays you don't want people, so there was a personal column too, which I think was important too.
I remember too, the last, late 80s, 90s with the newspaper, there would always be basically one major journalist at a time, it seemed. Maybe others.
Yes, as it got later, Chris Orcott was one. If you remember the name Chris
Oh, yes,
Orcott,
yes.
he was definitely a very good one. He interviewed my mother, and he really wrote wonderfully.
And Judith,
He was definitely a reporter.
Maybe Judith can sort of say how that works with a weekly paper at all. You cover Millbrook,
Yeah,
and you
but
cover a lot of.
I've only been doing it for about 10 years.
Yeah, well, that's
That was my retirement job.
oh boy. Yeah, so, it's.
However, I did, when I was 6, I went to the Standard store in New Rochelle. And that was a good many years ago, because I'm older than you are. And they had the presses, and it impressed me so much, the noise, and the idea that they were putting words on paper that people could read just fascinated me. And it took me about 70 years to come back and get a job in the paper, but I did it.
That's right. It's the whole feel and the vibration and the words.
It's a little different today, but it was just so exciting. You just knew that it was just so exciting. There's so many important things were going on those sheets of paper. It was amazing. And I never lost my love of newspapers because of that.
Neat.
Did
Does anyone know how much of the old papers are online? Are they available?
I don't know that.
Yes, so,
The library?
so
Yeah, library has.
the library from 1895, but it started in 1892, I understand, Swift. But 1895 to 1919 so far, the library, if you go on the website and hit local history collection and then hit, it's Hudson Valley Group that does newspapers. It's Millbrook Round Table is on there. And I guess Courtney just sent out another batch going forward to be done by the Southeast Library Group. So she is determined to get all of those newspapers on there. They're all on microfiche.
Right,
I've
read them,
Going to get
some of
some.
them
And there are hard copies of all of them in the attic, I believe.
Yeah, there are hard copies up, like in
There
that
are?
attic, I think.
Wow.
We
Which I
used to have
assume
to get school reports
I
up
don't know
there.
if they're digitizing from those or from the fiche.
Yeah, so they were, so Helen Meserve said that when they left, all of the papers were put on microfiche, I guess, at that
Yeah.
point. And then that's what Courtney is taking and,
Fiche is being,
yes, and digitized so that it's available to everyone easily. Also at New York State Library, apparently they have just about all of the Millbrook Round Tables on microfiche. Then you have to have a microfiche reader.
I was actually a proofreader for a little while at the Millbrook Round Table, but it was
Oh,
after your
yeah.
family owned it. It was down on Norwood Avenue, 1990.
Right.
That was cool.
Okay, Meserve's then.
Yeah.
And do you know where it was printed then? Was it Southern Dutchess?
No, I do not know, but I remember them being dropped off over in front of, I don't know who owns it now, that was that pretty little barn.
Yeah, the barn.
It was all stacked up there.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And when Meserve's left, they said it had all been, everything was digital at that point, and then the old papers had been microfiched, I guess. But they said they sold the intellectual property, computer subscriptions, and walked out. So I remember all those papers in that barn, the old forge. I never went in, but David, I think, did a lot with that, going through and sorting. And I don't know if anything's up in the library, because I'm part of that or not.
And one of the ways I got to live here, because I've only been here about 34 years, which is a very much newcomer compared to you folks who literally came up from the ground, I think, and grew here. But my former husband had heard of Millbrook. We were down in Dutchess, Putnam County. He'd heard of it, and he took a ride up, and he said, I think it's cool. They have a thing called the Millbrook Round Table. And so I called them and placed one ad for a moderately priced house for a growing family. And I want to go find that, because, you know, then that's how I got up here. I talked to one of the realtors. Yeah, it's cool. Of course, the moderately priced house was $154,000.
Yeah.
It was a moderately
Or they assessed. It's always great to hear people talk about why they came here, whether it was the newspaper, the library,
Yep.
and the bookstore. A lot of times, the library and the bookstore together. They go, oh, we have to move there.
Yep.
So it's all those are pillars of a community. And really important. And going back to